This KFAN podcast is sponsored by Builders and Remodelers, exclusive Twin Cities provider of Elements Windows. Get the highest quality windows at unmatchable value. Visit buildersandremodelers.com for more details.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
Bonus Bucks is back on the Fan. We have 9 chances for you to win $1,000 every weekday. That's every hour from 9 a.m. till 5 p.m. To know the keywords, learn more, head to KFAN.com. Bonus Bucks is presented by BigDeck.com.
We are pleased to be joined by one of the most accomplished veteran crime/investigative reporters that this market has ever had. Caroline Lowe, kind enough to join us via the Connecticut Water Systems hotline this afternoon. Caroline, can you hear us okay?
I can. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for the time. We very much appreciate it, and it's good to hear your voice after all of these years. I mentioned early in the show when I was laying out our guest lineup for today, as you, I'm sure, understand, this is a 30-year-old story that we're going to be talking about today, which means a lot of people in our audience weren't even alive. And many of them were young enough to maybe not have much insight or even recall of it. So for the younger folks who maybe aren't as familiar with the name Jodi Huisentruit, give us the basics for them to understand who she is and what she was doing at the time of her disappearance 30 years ago.
Sure, and thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about Jodi. Many of the reporters who I've been interviewed with, who have been interviewing me recently, weren't even alive when Jodi disappeared. So it's very much that situation. Jodi was a 27-year-old Long Prairie, Minnesota reporter anchor. She was in her third market in Mason City, Iowa, anchoring the morning news. She was on a typical track, working smaller market, working horrible hours. Hope to sometime in the next few years move up to the Twin Cities or beyond. A lot of potential ambition. And on June 27th, 1995, just after 4 in the morning, probably close to 4:30, Jodi was running late. So she went 30 seconds from leaving her apartment in Mason City, went down the hallway, down the stairs, 12 steps to her car. In 30 seconds, she was grabbed, we believe, from behind and gone. And for 30 years, what happened to Jodi has been a mystery. She never made it to work that day. They went ahead putting the show on. The producer who called her that morning, Amy Coons, went ahead and wrote the show, went on the air at 6, and then when the show was over at 7, the newscast, she asked a manager to do a welfare check on her, check with police or check. She never imagined that anything horrific had happened to Jodi. She thought maybe Jodi had just fallen back to sleep. Officers arrive on the scene to make the check, and they know right away that something very bad had happened. Jodi's car is still there, and a number of her personal items, her high heels, her blow dryer, earrings, are scattered next to her car. They go up to her apartment on the second floor, which faced her apartment, faced the parking lot, and there's no sign of Jodi. Nothing looks really amiss. Her bed is kind of made, but not made, pulled up. So the crime scene seemed to be whatever was going on in the parking lot. Immediately, it was all hands on deck. All police officers were called in. Eventually, the state DCI, the FBI, everybody was brought in because they knew something had happened. And 30 years later, I can't honestly say we have a much better idea than when we did then about what happened to Jodi.
It's an excellent summary, especially, as I said, for those not as familiar with the case as many of us who do remember it and we're already in this market. How did you get as involved in the reporting on this particular story as you have become?
Well, in 1995, when it happened, I was actually with photographer Nancy Suhu, and I were embedded with the Minneapolis Police Department Homicide Unit. As you probably recall, that was when we were dubbed Murderapolis, and there was a record number of homicides that year, so I was immersed in covering that. I did not cover Jodi's case initially. 2 years later, I covered a serial rapist in the Twin Cities and did a story on that. And not long after that, as the police were doing background, as they typically do, they think people don't just wake up one morning and rape 4 women in 2 weeks. Where was this person? As they're doing some checks, they found out he'd been in Mason City, Iowa, 2 years earlier when Jodi disappeared. So they contacted Mason City Police. Subsequently, we got a tip just saying, you may want to take a look at it too. we did. We found that the rapist, had been living just 2 blocks from Jody's station. There were another number of things that our WCCOI team came across that basically said, we have no idea if he did it, but this guy needs a close look. That got me hooked. Eventually, the police ruled him out, said he has nothing to do with it. We don't know what they established, perhaps an alibi. But once you connect on a story like this, which to us was a Minnesota story, now it's become this big true crime mystery that people are trying to solve from their homes all over the world. But to us, it was a local person. She was one of ours. Jody was part of the family. She was doing what we do. And as I said, I got to know her family and did updates on the anniversaries and followed up over the years, and then moved to California 14 years ago when a group called Find Jody, it's a nonprofit group of journalists, the co-founder, Josh Benson, reached out to me and asked if I'd like to join. And I joined, so I continue now from California. And as I'm sitting in my office, my kids call it my Jody's room. I work on it every day in one way or the other.
So there is a new, and I've not seen it yet, but there's a new Hulu documentary as we just passed the 30-year mark, as you mentioned. How involved were you with this documentary? Does it just sort of re-summarize the case, try to freshen it? Does it bring in the possibility of newer information, new suspects? Give us a sense of what the Hulu documentary is all about.
Well, first of all, we were not involved with it. The same producers who a couple of years, 3 years earlier, did a special for ABC for 2020. We were very involved in that, so some of our work from that shows up in there as well. But it basically looks at 4 people of interest. The man whose name has been in the news for years, a former friend of Jody's who passed away in December. And they take a new look at basically what we would call an old tip. There's a man from Winsted, Minnesota. You may recall last fall there was a dig there, and we found out it was Mason City police were there. It was in connection with Jody. Police shared very little about it, and we did not know what brought them there, except a member of our team who's passed away, Carrie Peterson, had interviewed the ex-wife of a person of interest back in 2007, who said she had gone to police previously, and she just had a lot of questions about some things with her husband. We're not naming him. He was named in the docuseries. We're not naming him or her. But he got quite a bit of attention. Police did a polygraph with him. They did some digging in Winsted. So it seems like they expanded their focus from largely focusing on John Van Cise, who was a friend of Jody's, the one I mentioned who passed away. They also include the rapist that I told you about, who I'm not sure why he was included, honestly, because he's no longer considered a person of interest. And there's a guy named Christopher Rivak, who's also deceased, and he's being looked at as a potential serial killer. Had an unusual connection with Mason City. His former wife at one point lived 3 months before John Van Cise moved into a duplex there. She lived there. So the question is, did he have any ties to Mason City? Mason City police looked into him in 2009 and dismissed him, so we don't know what made them dismiss him then. We don't know why he's on the radar now. We're not sure why the Winsted person is more on the radar now than before, but they're clearly looking in some different directions, which is good. I hope the takeaway from this is for people not to think, police have their guy, and any information I might have is not important, because it could be none of the above. We saw that, and I bring Jacob Wetterling up a lot. Yep. We saw what it's like to focus on one person and have it turn out not to be that person. So you want people to keep an open mind and come forward if they have some, not just a hunch or they've been watching TV, but if they have some information of something that happened back in 1995, to please come forward.
One of the tricky things from the outside looking in to me would be when you explore cases like these and try to put things together and do the kind of reporting you've done, is the question of whether there is reason to question the job law enforcement has done. And that is tricky, because it's always easy after the fact. And maybe it's even difficult to prove. But let's face it. I mean, some cases are better investigated than others. Some cases, significant mistakes are made early. And even sometimes where, suspects are rejected, there are occasions where new information comes forward, or maybe the law enforcement did not do a particularly good job, or even gets too hung up on a specific person. Does any of this apply in this case? And how tricky is that to negotiate those kinds of questions as you study this case?
Well, whether it's this case or any number of cases I've covered over the years, it is a delicate balance, and you are trying to inform the community. And I think in fairness to the police, what we saw, a lot of times you don't know until the case is over where the mistakes were made. I mean, we go down rabbit holes ourselves. I've been working all day on something which could be a total nothing. But, how you choose which ones to pursue, not avoiding confirmation bias, and it's easy to do as a reporter as well. You look for things that fit in your, in your path. And I think it's going to be down the road when we know for sure, hopefully that happens, what things should have been pursued. What I will say is I cannot remember a tougher case that I've covered. Even in Jacob's case, you had eyewitnesses. Eventually you had DNA that linked Jared Shirel to Danny Heinrich, and, they knew those cases were connected. In Jody's case, we have no eyewitnesses. You have 3-hour time gap before anyone called the police, not suspecting anything foul play. So many of the people now have passed away. I've called many people that lived in her apartments. Many of them don't have their memories that they had, or they're not there. So it's a tough case, and I can't think of a more difficult one. But I don't think from where I am now it would be fair to say, why didn't they go here? Why didn't they go there? Even though I will say I question why this tip that's being explored so closely now did not get looked at more closely earlier. I don't know what was shared with law enforcement back then, what were the factors, but as I said, it's the basics of it. It's not a new tip. It's 18 years old, at least, and from our contact on it.
And this tip, again, is about what?
This tip is regarding a man formerly lived in Winston, Minnesota, and Winstead, and his former wife had some questions. He had a white van. He supposedly visited Mason City, had shown interest in Jody. She and Jody were friends. They were childhood friends, and she just felt like so many people we hear from, take a look. And, nothing that totally ties them, but suspicions. And that's often what eventually leads to a development. But that seems to be the main newer angle that you're looking at in the docuseries.
I thought I read somewhere in one of the accounts I was reviewing to get ready for this discussion that there were some individuals living around there who did, after the fact, say they heard a scream, but they did not at the time they heard the scream call authorities. Does that sound right to you?
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
That everything like screams and things we've heard after the fact were after the fact. It was when the officers did what they typically do, going door to door, canvassing the complex in the neighborhood, that some people said they heard a scream. They'd heard screams or sounds before from the campgrounds behind them, so no one jumped and called 911 or did anything about it.
And as you say, there's a lot of stuff you can look back on and now wonder. I also believe she had been in an event. Was it at a golf course the night before?
Correct.
And was it then that she had been telling some individuals that she was thinking of changing her phone number because of some harassing calls she'd been receiving? Is that correct?
Right. Yes. Well, we interviewed her two members. She was at a charity golf at the Mason City Chamber of Commerce, and I interviewed two of her team members who did not want to be identified, but they both mentioned that she said she seemed like she was trying to minimize it, maybe because she's a public figure in an event, but she did say she was getting her number changed the next day, according to the people we interviewed, and getting kind of nasty nuisance calls, and that was basically it. But it came up when one of the teammates and his wife wanted to invite her out to dinner and send something up, and it came, she was going to change her number. So she was at that tournament the day before. I mean, the timeline is very significant in terms of looking at what she was doing, and law enforcement spent quite a bit of time interviewing these people and just about anybody they could reach at the tournament to see if there'd been anything out of the ordinary, any man paying attention to her, and nothing seemed to stand out. She left the tournament. She went there early in the morning. It was pretty much rained out, so she hung out there with her teammates and socialized and mixed with the people, and went home mid-afternoon to change clothes, came back for dinner, did some more socializing, left shortly before 8, and then the next thing that we have that's not in dispute, because there are timeline disputes from there, 8:24 that night, she called her good friend Kelly in Mississippi. Kelly wasn't home. She talked to Kelly's husband, who said everything sounded fine, nothing out of the ordinary. The next contact that's confirmed is when Amy Coons, her producer, called around 4 o'clock as Jody was running late and woke her up and said Jody sounded normal and said, "Jode, are you coming in to work?" "Yeah, I'll be right in." Nothing in the background, nothing stood out. What's up in the air and the question is the friend that we mentioned that police have focused on, John Van Sice, said that Jody had stopped by his house that evening to watch a 18-minute video of a birthday party he had co-hosted for her a few weeks earlier. And there have been some questions about the timeline, whether there's no way Jody could have done that right after the tournament and been home to make the phone call at 8:24. But, is it possible she went over afterwards? It's very late for someone who has to get up early, but Jody was young and 27, and it was not unusual for her perhaps to go out.
When a case
like that
is this old and in many ways this cold, how much can local law enforcement, like in Iowa, concentrate on it? I mean, is it active in the sense that someone is on it once a month, once a week, more intensively than that? How does it work for law enforcement where they obviously always have limited resources in how they investigate things? How is it working in this particular case as you know it?
I would say from the outside looking in, it's very challenging because the investigator who's been on it for many years now, he's now works 3 to 11 or something like that. He's an evening patrol supervisor. I'm sure he's taken on and off to work on it. There's a DCI agent, Ryan Herman, who was assigned to it. He's based in Mason City, but if there's an officer-involved shooting or something fresh happens, he's off and running on that. So they juggle it all in between everything else they do. I don't think there's probably too many days they're not doing something on it, but it is very much a challenge especially this. But if something big happens, everything drops and they're off and running, I'm sure.
Caroline, I'm very curious to know what the family situation is here because it strikes me, we have so many of these cases over the decades. And what has always fascinated me is sometimes families, how do I say this? It's a delicate way to put it. They're obviously never going to forget the loss, but they want to move on to a certain extent, or they feel like if they don't, they become tortured by it in a way that makes it difficult to live day to day. Other families, I sense, they want to be in it intensively and never stop. What do we know about the family in this case in terms of the approach that they want to take, how visible they want to be, how vocal they want to be, et cetera?
I would say that they live with their lives, their regular lives, and this ambiguous loss, the grief that they live with it side by side every single day. I just talked to Jody's sister this morning. Her niece there's a family Facebook page now. It's Jody's Hope. If people would like to hear from them, she just created it last December to have a voice, not have everybody else tell Jody's story, but put their own photos. And they also want to have it up to hold people accountable. There's been a lot of things over the years that they've either been uncomfortable with or misinformation, and that's a role they've chosen to have. But not all family members are out there in front. Jody's sister, Joanne, in particular, has been the face of the family, but her niece is getting more involved. But it's every day. It's every June 5th when Jody's birthday comes and it's missed. It's Christmas. It's Thanksgiving. It's all those things. And as I said, I'm in touch with them throughout the year all the time. And it's very real. And that's a huge part of what keeps me going is thinking we owe it to them because Jody was part of our extended family to get them answers. They don't expect Jody to come home. They had her declared legally dead in 2001. It was mostly for civil and paperwork, but they want to, like in Jacob's case, they want to bring her home to Long Prairie, Minnesota, have their own service. And, but no, it's part of their lives.
Doesn't go away.
It's probably more fresh some days than others, but it's very much a part of their daily life.
Yeah. I mean, the trite way to express it is what people always say about the unknown. Not knowing is even worse than if you had some certainty, and even if it's worst case scenario. But I think those of us who thankfully haven't had to go through this sort of thing could see that, could relate to that, could understand that has to be what's the greatest torture through this whole 30 years.
Well, think of this. Every time there are some remains found in Iowa, we scramble to try to find out quickly if it's not Jody, to try to let the family know so they don't find out or, in the news and have that whole scenario. Or if there's a serial killer that's in the news and people speculate it could it be connected to Jody? They go through all those horrific scenarios. So imagine that, to have all those swirling. Not that having sat in the courtroom when Danny Heinrich pled guilty and talked about Jacob's case, I mean, I know how horrific that was, but it was over, and nobody wants to use the word closure, but it's resolution. And you have a face, you know what happened, and you can begin. I don't think you can grieve until you know, truly grieve and move on.
Tell us what you are doing these days. You're based in Santa Barbara, correct?
No, now I'm up north of San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
We live in Sonoma County. We moved up here about 7 or 8 years ago. Two of our kids live here and our grandkids. Well, one day a week, I'm a kindergarten cop. I go into the city and help out with lunchroom duties and just jump in with our granddaughter's class. And we do a lot there. But I'm still spending a lot of time on Jody's case. Our team, we have people in 4 states. Josh Benson, who co-founded us, is in Florida with his wife, Tara Manis. And then we have Scott Fuller, who created our podcast and hosts that. He's in Wyoming now. And then in Minneapolis, we have Holly Kegel, who's a former Minneapolis investigator who I knew 20-something years ago, and now she's the police component in our team, and Brian Weiss, who is a photographer. So we're in touch all the time and, trying to figure out what we can do. Our main thing is keeping Jody visible. We know what gets covered. And that's why this past June 27th, I was in Mason City, and we hosted a very emotional, poignant ceremony for Jody. And as I said at the end, I really hope that next year it's in Long Prairie, that we're not there, that her family gets to do the ceremony. So that's pretty much, it's a part of my life every day.
I appreciate the time, and it's good to catch up after many, many years, and continued good work in this area, good investigative work in this area, and others. I know a lot of folks appreciate all the work you've done and did in the Twin Cities market for a long, long time. Be well, and thanks again for giving us as much time as you have this afternoon.
Thank you so much for putting the spotlight in Jody's case. And if again I could mention, Jody's Hope is the Facebook page, is her family's Facebook page, if anybody would like to check it out.
Excellent. Thanks again. I appreciate it, Caroline.
Thank you, Dan.
Caroline Lowe, longtime CCO investigative reporter. I think she did some work for KARE 11 eventually as well. Went out to California, Santa Barbara for a while. Now she says further north of San Francisco. And you never know who's listening. Example, Dan, Jody was scheduled to be a bridesmaid in my sister's wedding, disappearing just days before the event. Sad and devastating for all. Jody and my sister were high school classmates. Hulu has the updated documentary. I've not seen it. I'm going to try to take a look at it sometime in the next week or two. Back in just...
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?
A minute here in the fan.
You're up for a hilarious night when Dane Cook returns to the Island Events Center. See his legendary style of stand-up comedy live at Treasure Island Friday, October 24th. Get all the details now, TICasino.com.
Close circuit to Larry Mondello guy. Come on, man. He'll know what I mean. We're not going to change the subject that dramatically with Caroline Lowe, and we're talking about that particular very, very difficult, tragic story, that's for sure. And let's face it, I mean, part of what I think gives these stories life in the popular sense is the fact that it is at this point, 30 years later, a completely unsolved disappearance. It's almost, even though there have been some leads, the lack of leads. So many of these cases, it seems, over a period of time, it's almost as if the biggest challenge for law enforcement is, oh my God, we're getting like 85,000 tips, and most of them are meaningless. Most of them don't lead anywhere. That it's almost overwhelming how you separate what might be legit from what might not be anything. By the way, did Oak call in? Is that Oak? Oh no, I see line 7 is on hold and it says Oak. That must have been from earlier today. Did Common have him on to talk? I assume he had maybe do his own version.
He may have.
Of Ode to a Dead Guy. I thought maybe he had called in. By the way, John Bream is going to join us in about an hour. And we will do Ode to a Dead Guy, a very difficult day in the heavy metal music community, fair to say. Ozzy Osbourne. has died at the age of 76 years old. I have been around this market long enough to remember this particular story. And, we had what story was it? New York Times? I think it was a New York Times story within the last 2 weeks, part of a News on the March segment that laid out the fact that basically close to 50% of murders in the United States of America are unsolved. And it's a number that's jarring, if it's accurate. It's a jarring number, is it not? 1 out of 2. And it's a reminder that as much as we think, we watch TV shows in which almost every mystery, every crime is solved. It might take a week. It might take 6 weeks. It might take 10 weeks. But it's going to get solved, right? We just assume it. We just believe that that's the case. And this particular story, the abduction of Jody Huisentruit, a news anchor in Iowa back in 1995, is proof that, this is a case that got into the culture and was reported heavily for many, many years. But there's a million cases, one would assume, that get little to almost no attention, that half the time they also remain unsolved. And the latest, in this particular case, there's this question about this serial killer, perhaps having been there at the time and whether there might have been any connection there as well. And, it does fascinate me when you read details that lay out, as I said earlier, that, I heard a scream, but I didn't really think of anything of it. I didn't call the police. I never know what to make of that. It would seem like if you hear a scream outside this had to have been like about 4:35 in the morning, I think. That might have gotten your attention. Although maybe you think, it's just kids being stupid or, whatever the case may be. I don't know. But in this case, there's I don't think there's any forensic evidence. I think there's we didn't talk about it with Caroline Lowe, but I think there's a palm print on a post right near where the car was, but I don't think it's been identified. I don't think it's led to anything. And other than that, they got nothing. And the best theory is that she was abducted going to her car, so that there wasn't anything necessarily that they're going to be able to even find in the apartment in which she was living. But these cases get into the popular imagination, especially, as I said, when they remain 30 years later unsolved. And, as the bit goes, there's always a chance, right? That's the thing. Somebody sees it, jogs something in their head, they think about it. But then the other complication is what Caroline Lowe mentioned, is people die. And sometimes that even can include perpetrators. Certainly can include witnesses. And she said some of the witnesses, or shouldn't say witnesses, others who lived in the apartment building, their memories aren't so good as they've gotten older as well. And so you lose the thread. It got to be ever more challenging the further away you get from the actual crime. On the other hand, the Jacob Wetterling, a lot of people there thought, that's never going to be solved. And ultimately, it was as well. Bradshaw and Bryan KFAN text line is open at 64686. If anyone else has any recollection of this particular story. And we've had, sadly, other stories involving anchors that also tend to get attention as well. We are going to have Top 5 at 5. Are you prepared for that, top of the hour?
I will be.
We will lighten up things up a little bit via the toy department. And as I mentioned, we'll get to some musical legacy stuff with John Bream. We've already talked a decent amount of Vikings with Kevin Seifert. That'll be an ongoing theme all week. Today was more press conference day where the head coach and the general manager spoke to the Jackals. I don't think it was described by Seifert as pretty boring because there's not a lot on the table right now. We don't have contract squabbles like the Cincinnati Bengals do, for example. Dallas Cowboys might do. might have. We don't have much of that to speak of it at this point. We've signed a lot of people. We seem to be, most people seem to be relatively happy, and we're basically now in, what are we going to see from the starting quarterback? That's a lot of what we're thinking about. Although I think by Thursday when we're out at camp, I want to emphasize a little bit more about what the Vikings defense might be in this upcoming season. Might that be the story that's not being told quite enough? I think that's a fair part of the conversation. I'll keep the text coming, as I said. Let's get caught up after we went a little bit long with Caroline Lowe, and then we'll prepare at the top of the hour for Brett Blakemore's Top 5 at 5.
Gatorade Zero, the #1 proven electrolyte blend, made with zero sugar. Designed to hydrate better than water so you can lose more sweat and push more limits. Gatorade Zero, is it in you?
Get ready, comedian Nate Bargatze is bringing 2 nights of laughs to the XL Energy Center. Don't miss out on the hilarity when he takes the stage Saturday, July 26th and Sunday, July 27th with the Big Dumb Eyes World Tour. Limited tickets still available. Got the details now, KFAN.com. Keyword calendar.
The documentary on Hulu regarding the Jody Huisentruit story is called Her Last Broadcast, the abduction of Jody Huisentruit. And as I said, I've not seen it, but I think it's gotten pretty decent reviews and is a good sort of update on the story. I think it's 3 episodes. Intended to be 1 season, and there's 3 episodes in it. There are a couple people who were listening to our conversation with Caroline Lowe, a former investigative reporter, big shot in the Twin Cities for decades, who's now out west in California, but still stays very close in this story and has reported on a lot of it over the years. And a couple people wanted the name of the doc. That's my understanding on it. What do they say? The first 48 hours most crucial. Yeah, there's no question. There's some truth to that. Doesn't mean stories can't or cases can't be solved later, and often are, but the cliche seems to be true. It's very much about the freshest information gives you the best chance. Couple other texts. Oh, this came out of nowhere. During the break, I'm just checking X. And there's a guy I follow named Michael Shermer, who is a publisher of something called Skeptic Magazine. And I don't know what the context of this was, but he quotes from a scene from a Netflix series called American Manhunt, O.J. Simpson Part 4. And the scene involves apparently an ex-agent named Mike Gilbert, as he recalls a conversation with O.J. at Rockingham as they're packing up the house to sell. And he's described here as, O.J. is described as being in a reflective mood. And in the interview, the ex-agent says, it was just one of those moments that was right. And I said, O.J., what happened that night? Just what happened? And he said, what do you think happened? And I thought, do I do what agents do and say, oh, yeah, I know you didn't do it. You never would have done it. Or do you tell the truth? And I said, O.J., I always thought you did it. And he glanced up and I said, not because I see you as a murderer, but because I don't. And he just kind of shook his head and he said, if Nicole wouldn't have opened the door with a knife, she would still be alive. End quote. So the question that's asked in this episode of that series, what if O.J. did not go over to Nicole's house to kill her husband, but instead was engaged in his normal jealousy-fueled mate-guarding stalking behavior, saw Ron Goldman there and became enraged? Nicole grabbed a knife to protect herself. He grabs the knife from her, flew into rage, and killed them both. I don't know that that's necessarily ever been established, but it's an interesting theory and a conversation I don't remember hearing about. Maybe there's others who indeed have. And, there's a reason. How many true crime documentaries, how many true crime regular TV shows are there even on commercial television, right? It's endless. 48 hours, that's I think CBS, is it not? What's the NBC one that's huge? That's been going on forever.
Dateline?
Dateline. Yeah, Dateline is like it's an incredible property. And there are like podcast Dateline versions, there's TV versions, etc. Every ABC's got their own version, and a lot of times these cases end up getting repeated. And I know the Huisentruit case has been examined on some of these true crime documentaries as well. But I'm going to try to watch the Hulu deal and see if it brings anything new to this particular case. Not a local story, but interesting. Art Bell interviewed the lead investigator years ago. The case has haunted him. National Guard sent a group of soldiers to assist in the search, which in of itself was and still is considered suspicious. I don't know which case he's referring to there. Just shared a missing person with you growing up in Inver Grove. Playing in the park was always a story close to me, even at a young age, because I would have potentially graduated with this individual. That's from Selby Fairview guy. Did you do the keyword for the 4 o'clock hour? Because it was a funky hour. I went long.
Yeah, it was a little. It was credit, if you're wondering.
Okay, fair enough. That's good enough.
Did you see this text from 507 guy?
No, which one?
I want to refresh.
Let me hit refresh. Is it at the top?
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Let me hit the refresh.
This is pretty. You never know who's listening. If it's true.
Button. Well, that gets a little bit difficult. I was the promotions director at KIMT in 1995. Was the manager who made the call to the MCPD for the welfare check on Jody. Arrived at the station during the Daybreak morning show. Had to walk through the studio to get to my office. Thought it was odd that Amy was on the desk and not Jody. After the show, Amy came to my office and told me about her call to Jody, and then she never showed up. Amy went back to the studio to do the morning show cut-ins, and I called the MCPD. It was hours later that things came to light, and the days that followed were crazy. Network satellite trucks and all. Oh, that certainly sounds very believable, and that's got to be vivid, even though that's, 30 years ago now? I bet you when you go through something like that, it's unlikely that you're ever likely to forget it. We got into the tricky subject with Caroline Lowe, too, of not all investigations are well done. I mean, it's like one would expect. Some investigators are better at their jobs than others. And second guesses are always easy in situations like these about why didn't you do this instead of that, whatever. But we have enough people that we're affiliated with on this show in law enforcement who acknowledge that, some people do their jobs better than others. There's nothing necessarily malignant about the approach, but that some are better at investigating leads, some not so much. And there's that age-old question that fascinates me, something we should talk about. We should have some law enforcement folks, maybe the chief, on this subject, because it always fascinates me that what I have read, even from crack investigators, is the hardest thing to guard against is confirmation bias. In other words, you get an idea about who's responsible for a given crime. And without even realizing that you're doing it, you start just forcing stuff in that makes your theory look more credible, at the risk of sometimes ignoring other leads that, if you follow them a little longer, might take you in another direction. That's, I think, very human, too, where you start going down that road. And then the danger, of course, is you get too far down that road to admit, we got this wrong. We're going the completely wrong direction. And by the time you correct, maybe too much time has been lost. It's a fascinating byproduct, I think, of these sorts of investigations. And look, in some cases, at least early, before more experienced state investigators get involved, isn't there also the question of, if it's a local entity where the investigators don't have much experience, with those kinds of serious crimes, abductions, things like that, that they just might not have the experience. They just might not have the ability to see it freshly in the right way from the beginning of the case. That also can be rather problematic. Maybe down the road, well, we're headed into the non-abyss, so it's going to be hard with football season, but maybe we can try to, on an off day, squeeze in a little bit more from some law enforcement types on that particular subject. That might be kind of an interesting follow-up to this story. And, man, it would be wonderful if there could be some big development in the Huisentruit case that would at least resolve it. Because as Caroline Lowe said, talking to the family members, you do live with it every day. They've already given up on, they're not thinking there's any miracle that she's going to walk back through the door 30 years later. They've already went through the process to declare her legally gone. But there's still, I think, human nature being what it is, a desire to try to get what the hell happened. And maybe there's people out there who would rather not know. But I think most people, human nature being what it is, would want to at least get as much of that even 30 years later to get some idea that you're not constantly working through it in your head day after day after day. In a half hour or so, probably about 5:30, a little more than that, John Bream is going to join as we talk a little heavy metal and the Ozzy Osbourne legacy, which I know is important to a lot of the music lovers listening to this program. That's at 5:30. We got some more Viking stuff to get to. We've got top 5 at 5. First, what are you working on? What's percolating for today's top 5 at 5?
It will include some Vikings nuggets and some NFL contract disputes.
No Packers?
I can.
How about an obligatory fallness moment? Are you going to wedge one in, or are you going to just ignore it this time?
I might wedge one in just for a nothing burger.
Any corn sweat updates?
No.
Can we get to a couple of those?
I'm out on the corn sweat.
That's a call back from much earlier in the show. We'll explain.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade, is it in you?